In this video, I wish to say Ave atque vale Lord Carrington. So it was just yesterday that Lord Peter Carrington died. His lordship passed away at the age of 99 years. So not a bad innings, I think anyone will agree, but he had not been prominent in public life for quite some time. So, in case you don't know, who was he? Well, he's most renowned for having been Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary 1979 to 82. So he was a hereditary peer. He'd inherited this title, and he pointed out how his family in the 18th century had been tailors and cloth merchants in Nottingham. They prospered in trade, got into politics, and his ancestor became an ally of Pitt the Younger, and the Prime Minister gave Carrington's ancestor this peerage, and at the time there were guffaws of derision from people who were already peers of the realm for generations, saying that this was really making them déclassés, that a mere tailor shouldn't get a peerage. But by the 20th century, the Carringtons had been nobility for long enough that being a toff seemed to count against him. So he went to Eton, as was virtually compulsory for peers in the 1930s, and then to Sandhurst before the Second World War. And he served with one of the guards regiments, one of the foot guards regiments in the Second World War. And indeed, they had tanks. I've read his autobiography, and he said when he gave some sort of order over the tank radio, there was a pause of a couple of seconds before it was acknowledged. He later found out that's because the soldier in the other tank was actually saluting him before he would reply. He was very short-sighted. Talking about his first day of Sandhurst, of marching in, reporting him, told he hadn't suited properly, having to do it many, many times. Even getting onto a bicycle had to be done in a particular way. And him seeing Her Majesty the Queen back when she was the Princess of Wales. Anyway, he's almost unique as a peer in that his surname and his title is the same. His name was Peter Carrington, and his title is Lord Carrington. So he got to know people very well in the Second World War, people from the opposite end of the social scale, and see them as individuals, as human, if that doesn't sound too blunt and horrid, because the 1930s was a very different era when there was a huge gulf between the proletariat and the aristocracy, and so he wouldn't speak to them on a one-to-one basis, and class barriers came down a bit. They were men in his unit, took a very active interest in their welfare, and said that some of them had been unemployed in the 1930s through no fault of their own. That was a Great Depression, and they blamed the Conservatives, who were the dominant party of the time, and that's why many of them voted Labour. So he went into politics. He wanted to make life better for most people, keep unemployment down. He was a minister of state, not a secretary of state, under Churchill, the last surviving minister of Churchill's. And in the 50s, he was High Commissioner to Australia. He was there at the time of the Suez Crisis, and he said that Australia under Robert Mingus, said he was British to his bootstraps, had Australia back the United Kingdom and the United Nations over the Suez issue, and he thought this was commendable in many respects, but Carrington had to privately acknowledge this was not serving Australia's national interests. Their bread was buttered on the other side. It was better for them to speak out against what the UK was doing and curry favour with the Afro-Asian bloc. So Carrington was on the wet wing of the Conservative Party, as in, we must keep unemployment down because that's a waste of human potential. He would also bring back the polarisation and the totalitarian ideologies of the 1930s. A bit of social justice. We must meet Labour halfway. Buttskillism, like Butler and Gateskill, the two main post-war chancellors of the exchequer of either major party. Gateskill a Labour man, Butler a Conservative. A mixed economy. So be not too far apart from Labour and policies. High taxation, high regulation, excellent public services. Anyway, he was in the cabinet later on. When the Northern Ireland conflict came out, he was partly responsible for drawing up some controversial policies about interrogation techniques, which would now be regarded as unacceptable, though that wasn't widely known about at the time that he had a hand in that. This is the 70s, it was different. It was a different era, and some people say, oh, well, that was the time. Moreover, when it comes to a conflict, push sometimes does come to shove, and people will do things which now, or no longer in the heat of the moment, would be regarded as unacceptable. So he was Foreign and Commonwealth Secretary from 1979 on, as I previously pointed out. He was going up to the Conservative Party conference in October 1979, and there were some people who very much backed the breakaway government of Zimbabwe, then called Rhodesia, and saying hang Carrington or something like that. And he said, no, 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 we can't possibly do that. We can't recognise this black majority government that's installed there. 1/3 of the representation is white. That's not good enough, and it would split the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth of Nations was felt to be important at the time. But the most important thing he did was to chair the Lancaster House Conference. September 1979, Thatcher had just been Prime Minister for 4 months, and they got the warring parties to lay down their arms. The Zimbabwean government, which had a lot of whites in it, came over, and the various factions of the Patriotic Front, Mugabe's ZANU and Nkomo's ZANU. And they all met at Lancaster House in London, where many diplomatic conferences are held. So Nkomo, he dubbed Carrington the old fox for being so wily. Apparently, MI5 bugged the Zimbabwean delegation's room, so they found out what their bottom line was in negotiating, as in, if we demand this, they would just walk away from the table. And it was a very hairy experience. Went on for over 3 months, and at times the whole thing would collapse, and various factions are going to walk out and go back to war, not jaw. But anyway, after over 3 months of protracted and painstaking negotiations, finally they'd hammered out a deal, and the rest is history. Zimbabwe became a colony for a transitional 4 months. Lord Soames was governor. There were only about 1,000 Commonwealth troops there from Kenya, Australia, and the United Kingdom. Fast forward to elections, and it surprised many people that Robert Mugabe's ZANU won hands down. And then April 1980 was the independence ceremony, and that was that the United Kingdom could wash her hands of Zimbabwe. The Prince of Wales went out there for the independence ceremony to hand over the constitutional deeds with the greatest possible goodwill, and Westminster was delighted to have Zimbabwe off its desk, which had been a problem which had bedeviled Westminster for almost 20 years. Then the Falklands conflict. Well, 1st of April 1982, there's some news. There are Argentine warships steaming towards the Falklands. No, is it an April Fool's Day joke? But the 2nd of April, they did indeed land and seize the Falklands, not killing any of the Royal Marines there, but having one of their own men killed. Anyway, that was that. Lord Carrington said it's a humiliation and someone's got to take the rap for it. Not personally responsible. Isn't it a defence issue? He resigned as Foreign Commonwealth Secretary. He's the last person to accept responsibility, even though he hadn't messed up. These days, always shift the blame. I don't believe in having ministers resigning all the time. What good does that do? We need some continuity. So that was that. He was, I suppose, a grand old man of politics and elder statesman people would go to for counsel. He was very dignified, a man who was full of grace. He was reserved, restrained, banal, but perhaps he belonged to another era. He let boys from his old school, I was one of them, use his estate for beagling. So all-round stand-up good chap. The family used to own Wickham Abbey. It had been seized from the Catholic Church centuries ago. It was then sold to this girls' school when they were set up in 1880. So his estate was in Buckinghamshire, if I remember correctly. So that's it. Lord Carrington. Well, he's gone to the great big private members club in the sky, no doubt swilling pink gin as we speak. They don't make him like that anymore. And Mugabe is one of the only delegates from the Lancaster House Conference still with us, unfortunately. Well, that's it. I wish you all the best, Lord Carrington.